Hey everyone, Richard Gibbons here, MLS Director for Southwest MLS, and today I'm going to go through all of the bylaws changes that are being voted on at our annual membership meeting in December. So as a reminder, only participants can vote. These are also known as a designated realtor. A participant is the lead qualifying broker of an individual office. So there's still a lot of good information here for MLS subscribers to know about and just to make sure you understand and just so we can kind of talk through some of these changes that are going on here. Now, once we get past the introduction and housekeeping, this video is broken up into three sections. You have major changes, minor changes, and reality changes. Major changes materially affect the way we do business. There's only three of those. Minor changes are things that are worth mentioning because they can affect how we do business, but there's a really minimal impact. And then there's what I'm calling reality changes. These are simply bringing the bylaws in line with how the organization actually works. The rules the bylaws hadn't been updated in quite some time, so some things need to be updated to kind of help things run a little more smoothly and really codify that. Now, within each section, the rules are simply in order by how they appear by page. So there's no additional order there, nothing to worry about. And I set up this video this way on purpose to put the most important information at the beginning for those who don't want to watch the whole video, right? But still covering every single change in detail for those who do want to understand every single change. This is not meant in any way to mean that some changes are more important than others, and I'm a firm believer that really everyone should watch the entire video because bylaws and governance are the secret sauce of what makes an organization run effectively. And in the end, this is your organization. It's your elected representatives who are running this organization here. So I did the videos this way just trying to appeal to the broadest range of members possible to get, the people who only wanted to watch a short one and the whole thing. I want to give a quick thank you to the Bylaws Task Force that worked through this project. It was President Jeanette Raver, immediate past President Kathy Colvin, and current SWMLS Director Mary Kay Gutierrez. These three volunteers dedicated more than 20 hours of their personal time to sitting in a conference room and combing through every single section of the bylaws to bring us up to date along with other conversations via email and phone calls outside of those meetings. Of course, also a big thank you to the Southwest MLS Board of Directors who took the work from the task force, reviewed it carefully, provided their own input and changes, and then passed these changes at the September meeting. So just a quick note before we get into housekeeping, I want to say based on my meetings with the Volunteer Task Force and Board of Directors, throughout the process, I noticed three important themes emerge. The first theme is participants remain in control. Every decision we made was with the intention that the participants and their elected representatives remain in control of Southwest MLS. Two was making Southwest MLS more nimble. We live in a world that is moving increasingly faster, especially in the technology space, and the organization needs options to move faster without as much red tape. And third, to equip your directors and officers to lead the organization in an effective way by attracting and training new directors to come in, keeping some continuity overlap on the board of directors to maintain levels of experience, and even bringing in some outside perspectives to help lead the organization. Now, a few quick housekeeping items to help you follow along with the explanations. Any language that is red, blue, or purple is additional language that is being added. It just may have been added at different times during the process. Strikeout language shows things that are being removed. And the rationale sections that are in the large, bold, red font are informational only and will not be included in the final copy. I also want to point out down here in the bottom left, I'm going to have page numbers and article numbers explaining each of these, and it's going to refer to the page numbers on the version with the rationale. Also, if you're watching this video on YouTube, you can click the Show More button in the description to see timestamps to individual sections that are going to be ordered by section. These screenshots are from my basic training video just as an example of what this looks like, but bottom line is you can click the blue timestamp to jump to the description of that particular section. Finally, sections and article numbers for the final draft will be updated to be consistent throughout the bylaws. So it's going to have formatting similar to the rules and regulations refresh that happened earlier this year. I've kept it in the current format with the current articles and sections just so you can have a one-to-one comparison against the old version, but please disregard any kind of numbering or formatting issues on this draft. Those will be updated once the final draft is approved. All right. So now let's actually get into the changes, starting with the major changes. Remember, these are the ones that materially affect the way we do business. So first up are these changes that add requirements to what it takes to be a director or officer with Southwest MLS. So when someone joins the board of directors, it generally takes about 2 to 3 months to really get up to speed and understand what's happening in the boardroom. These requirements are being added to ensure that anyone who is joining the board can hit the ground running. Now, keep in mind, looking at this list, only 3 of the 8 requirements must be met. So you don't have to meet all 8 of these. That would be absolutely ridiculous. You only have to meet 3 of them. Further, the easiest way to look at this is to actually separate the top 5 items from the bottom 3 items. So if someone does not meet any of the top 5 items, but decides that they want to run for the board in July or August when we announce that these things are coming up, all 3 of the bottom items could easily be completed before they take office in January. So this ensures that any new director coming in has enough exposure to the board to be ready to make decisions from day one without setting the bar so high that we exclude people from coming to the board. We still want to attract new talent, right? So, but meanwhile, if anybody has completed any of the top 5, it makes it one less item from the bottom that they must complete. Setting it up this way where the bottom 3 items must be completed helps us actually meet an NAR MLS best practice that states any incoming director should receive training on their position. But meanwhile, we're also relieving the amount of training for anybody who has experience on a committee at the local, state, or national level because they kind of already have a little bit better idea of what's going on. There are 2 other places in the rules that refer back to these qualifications. It's in Article 6.3, Sections 3 and 4. And language was just added that if members are added by participants by participation or write-in, they must also meet these requirements. You'll see that language a little bit later. Just below the qualifications, where it starts with further and officer or director nominee, there in purple, you can see we also added that if an officer or director is removed for cause, they cannot run again for 2 years. Article 6.5, Section 6, and that is referenced there, covers being removed for having too many absences. And the other article referenced there, Article 6.7, covers being removed for a violation of Code of Ethics or being removed by the directors or participants. So only if a director is removed by cause are they ineligible to run for 2 years. If they're removed for some other reason, maybe it's health reasons, personal reasons, so on and so forth, they would not be prohibited from rerunning once those issues have passed. Next up is currently every officer position is elected every year. So your president, your vice president, and your secretary treasurer are each elected every single year. Traditionally, the vice president has always run as unopposed for that president position. So we've always kind of just by tradition moved the vice president up to president. This change is being made so that's not necessary. So the president doesn't have to, or the vice president doesn't have to run again every year. And then we're also changing the name to president-elect to reflect this change. So this is an industry best practice. This helps with continuity because being the president requires essentially a 3-year term. You have first as your president-elect, then as the president, and then finally as immediate past president. So having that 3-year overlap along with the other people who come behind them, this gives a lot of continuity to the organization so you don't constantly have, you make a change and then a year later you change it back again. You really want to have that continuity in an organization. Now, this is classified as a major change because we are eliminating that, where president isn't voted on every single year, only president-elect. But again, it's really just codifying in the bylaws the rotation which has traditionally been followed anyways. Finally, we're changing the bylaws so that changes to the rules and regulations that are approved by the Southwest MLS Board of Directors do not have to in turn also be approved by the GAAR Board of Directors. This change is being made to allow Southwest MLS to be more nimble in their decisions. Currently, in reality, what ends up happening is, minor rule changes are built up over time until there's enough changes to make it worth bringing to the GAAR Board of Directors. Even if we change this practice and we brought forth every individual change every single meeting, it still generally adds another 30 days between the SWMLS board approving the changes and it being ratified by the GAAR Board of Directors. Within the bylaws, there's another 30 days that's required for notice to participants before a rule can take effect, which isn't going anywhere. That's a good practice to have. But that creates a minimum of a 60-day gap between Southwest MLS board approving a change and it going into effect. So, of course, the GAAR Board of Directors will still have final say over bylaws changes, director nominations, budgets, and votes from special meetings. But we are looking to take away where they don't have to approve each individual rules and regulations change. Another way to look at this, if you think of a publicly traded company, because remember, GAAR is the single shareholder of Southwest MLS. But think of that publicly traded company. What level of involvement do the major stakeholders have? They, of course, have control over the board, the budget, and the bylaws, because those are high-level items that dictate the future and direction of a company. But those major shareholders, however, in a publicly traded company, would not get into the weeds of the day-to-day business of running that organization. This approach puts GAAR in a similar position where they still maintain control of the organization as a whole, but removes a layer of the red tape on that day-to-day business that's just not necessary. So that's it for the major changes. Now, we're going to move into some of the minor changes that are worth mentioning because they can affect how we do business, but there's going to have minimal impact. First off is this change to Article 4.3, which you'll find on page 2, about the definition of a subscriber. Because Southwest MLS bases board appointees and participant votes on subscriber counts, this section previously made it so that unlicensed admins counted towards those vote counts. In Southwest MLS, unlicensed admins are free accounts, so it does not make sense to count them as subscribers. It does not change anything with admins' roles, access, or capabilities within the MLS. We're simply making it where they do not count towards the vote totals when you're talking about electing directors or appointees. Next is Article 6.1, which you'll find on page 3. Throughout the rules, the title of Vice President is being changed to President-elect to reflect the auto-ascension that we discussed previously. This is just a few other places it's happening, so you'll also see it in 6.2 and 7.5 as well. Article 6.2, number 5 on page 4 is adding the option to add outside perspective to the board of directors with up to 2 non-voting members. So the section has been left open deliberately, so we may make room for directors from other MLSs, or maybe a CEO of a tech company, or maybe lawyers or accountants, or anybody who the board believes would provide a valuable input in our decision making. Now, a couple important notes: these are non-voting members. And also, as outlined in the second sentence there, these members do not receive any of the travel or other expenditures extended to appointed and elected directors. So there's no impact on the overall budget. It's just trying to get some outside perspective into the boardroom so that we have more than just a room of realtors looking at this and making decisions. This is another industry best practice for MLSs across the country. Again, if you look at publicly traded companies, it's extremely common to have folks from outside of the organization sitting on your board. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe I've heard recently the Apple board of directors only has one person on it who actually works for Apple. So it's just an industry best practice and something we're trying to do to bring in some outside perspective. Article 6.4 on page 6. The purpose of this section is to keep a rotation of directors in place that always have some experience, along with keeping new positions opening every year. So the way this is written is you're supposed to have staggered 3-year terms, and 1/3 of those terms expire every year. So theoretically, you should always have 2 people rolling off, and you should always have 2 open positions. But because of recent directors being either removed or resigning from office for personal reasons or things like that, this article also said that a director would only serve until the end of that fiscal year. The problem with that is it has now broken things where a couple years ago, 3 years ago, we had no director positions open, and this year we have 5 director positions open. So those staggered terms have been broken. So the intent of this change is to make it where we always have that, because when a director is filling in for somebody who was removed from office or resigned from office, they will then complete the remainder of the term instead of only that year. So that's going to keep the terms where they always roll over like they're supposed to. And then additionally, we added a provision where the board of directors have the option of shortening a term length if necessary in order to make those staggered term requirements line up. Because as right now, we're going to have 5 new directors coming in this year. So the board of directors, as future elections happen, are going to have that leeway to fix the issue with our staggered terms. It's going to take a couple years to get there, but it gives them that option. So Article 6.5, number 6 on page 7. This is another change intended to help keep staggered terms explained just now in 6.5. It's just talking about that if somebody fills in for a director who is removed from being absent from 3 meetings, then they fulfill the rest of that term. That number right there, the change from 7 to 10%, that's purely clerical. Article 6.2, number 1, that talks about what percentage you have to have an appointee on the board. That number was changed from 7% to 10% back in 2011, but it was missed in this section that we also need to make it say 10% to reflect the same as that section. That's not actually changing anything about how a director is appointed. Now, this section is Article 6.5, number 8. It's a brand new section on page 5. Because the president-elect will now be auto-ascending, we needed to address how other ascensions would happen should an officer be removed from office. So this section is being added to explain that. Essentially, if the president is removed from office, the president-elect fills that position and then remains the president for the following year because they were elected by the subscribers to fill that position. However, if the president-elect is removed from office, the secretary-treasurer will fill that position in the interim only until a vote of the participants can be held to fill the president-elect position again. Because the secretary-treasurer was not elected to be president, so they're only going to be an interim fill until the participants can choose another president-elect. Article 6.7 covers a process whereby participants have the option to remove an officer or director from office if they are deemed incapable of fulfilling the duties for which they are elected. It sets a pretty high bar. Participants first need to get a 1/3 majority petition, and then second, have to call a special meeting and get enough people to show up to that meeting. Step 3 of the process is what's being tweaked a little bit because previously it required a 3/4 majority vote of those in attendance. If the subscribers and participants make a collective decision to remove an officer or director from office, this section already sets a pretty high bar that has to be met. So the board felt that reducing the requirement of step number 3 from a 3/4 vote to a 2/3 vote reduces that burden to a more reasonable level. So that's why that change was updated here. And then finally, this change allows committees to move things to the board without meeting with a 2/3 vote rather than requiring unanimous consent. This allows the organization to be a little more nimble between meetings and not force every decision to wait a full month for the next meeting. This isn't something that comes up often, especially with things like policy. You always really want to sit in a room and talk through it, and we beat it up and look at all the ifs and whats and what ifs. But maybe with compliance, there may be a thing where somebody might need a fine waived or things like that. So just trying to make things a little more nimble where we do have that option to make decisions in between meetings with only a 2/3 majority instead of unanimous consent. So finally, we have what I call the reality changes. These changes are simply bringing the bylaws in line with how things are done in reality with zero impact to how we actually do business. So to start with, there was a sentence in Article 1 that said the words he, his, and him are used in these bylaws shall be deemed to refer to both the masculine and feminine gender and shall include the words she, hers, and her. There was only 2 places in the bylaws that actually still referenced he, his, or him, so we just updated those 2 places to be gender neutral, which renders this sentence unnecessary. So there's nowhere else in the rules that use gender-specific pronouns, so that's why we're removing that one. Now, this one is important for clear cooperation. So whether or not a property is required to be entered into the MLS under clear cooperation is decided by the MLS service area. With the current verbiage, which said the area within which the service functions shall be a natural market area as it evolves in the Southwest, it was not really super clear. The idea of a natural market area is a little nebulous. It's not well defined. So there's an industry standard best practice to define the service area in the rules and regulations instead. So that's what the change is here, is that the service area in the MLS shall be determined by a resolution of the MLS Board of Directors, which would then be included in the rules and regulations. We're not changing our service area. Generally we consider our service area to be Bernalillo, Torrance, Sandoval, and Valencia counties, and then just kind of the bottom part of Santa Fe County. That's not changing. It's just being codified in the rules and regulations instead of in the bylaws. Section 6.2 number 1 and and Article 7.3. These are changes that are being made to match the way that business has traditionally been done. So this is related to how you calculate appointed directors in 6.2 and how you calculate votes for directors, which is Article 7.3. So previously, it just said that we shall review the demographics of the participant firms, and then it's based on subscriber count. It was very, very vague. But the way things are actually calculated is that under 6.2, when you're determining a appointee, it counts for every subscriber under a company instead of just an office. So, for example, if Company A has multiple different office locations under them, all of the subscribers in all of those locations are used to determine the number of appointees that company gets. However, this is different from the way that it's handled in 7.3. In 7.3, we're talking about how directors are voted for. So each participant in each office location only votes with the subscribers that are within their office. So it's not one company voting for everybody, but the one company does have the appointee. So what we're doing here is just making 6.2 and 7.1 reflect what we've actually done traditionally. So this is the way these counts have always been calculated. We're not changing anything. We're just bringing the bylaws in line with that method. This is Article 6.3, number 4 on page 5. This was just some required language that had to be added per NAR guidelines, and it allows for write-ins during the nomination and voting process, which is something we already do. So not a major change there, just some language we had to add per NAR. And this one I want to point out, 6.3 number 5, this language is actually not being removed. It's actually just being moved to a different section. It's being moved to Article 7. So when we get to 7.3, you'll see it's been added to the bottom of 7.3. This is Article 6.6, which you'll find on page 7. The full conflict of interest policy is maintained in the policy manual instead of the bylaws. So we're just adding a reference here for people to look to the policy if they want to see the full conflicts of interest policy, because it's a whole lot more than just the 2 sentences right here in the bylaws. In Article 6.7, we just added this term of "but will not resign voluntarily from office." This is talking about if an officer or director needs to be removed for a code of ethics violation or non-compliance with the member duty. And then if the directors or the participants want to remove that person and they will not resign office voluntarily, then they have to follow that process I talked about earlier with the petition and the meeting and the votes. So we just added this language in for the "but will not resign from office voluntarily" because obviously that would be a lot more preferred rather than having to go through that whole process. This is going back to what I was talking about when we with 6.2 number 1. These changes again are done to make the bylaws match reality. So we're simply clarifying here that subscriber counts for the purposes of voting are calculated differently than for the purpose of appointees. And then, of course, the final sentence here was brought in from its previous place at Article 6.3, Section 5, where I told you it wasn't being removed, it was just being moved, or removed, it was just being moved. This section is being added into Article 7 just to codify that officers and directors of the board are allowed to meet via electronic means. Obviously, this was happening during the pandemic because it was the only way to continue doing business. So we're just adding it to the bylaws that they are allowed to participate via electronic means and it not count as an absence. They are limited to only doing this for 2 meetings per year, and there are guidelines in place to ensure active participation. Of course, meetings that are primarily held via electronic means are not going to count against that 2 meeting maximum. So it's just putting some guidelines in place on how to do that. And then finally, this same guideline, it was added for the committees as well, so that they are also allowed to meet on Zoom or by electronic means in general. Except committee members are not limited to how many meetings they can attend via electronic means. Some of our committees meet only via electronic means, especially while we have some damage to the building here. So that was just added so the committee members do have the option, but they don't have the limit that the board of directors have. So that's all of them. Looks like we're about 25 minutes right now. One of my longer videos for sure. Of course, if you have any questions about any of these bylaws, please give me a call. I'm happy to talk through any of these changes in detail. I'm sure the 3 members of the bylaws task force mentioned earlier, or any of your board of directors, will be happy to comment as well. The biggest thing I want to drive home is that this is your organization. This is, these are your elected representatives who are making decisions on your behalf. And we love feedback, whether it's about the bylaws, whether it's about SWMLS. We love feedback. So, quick thank you to everybody who filled out the survey as well. We had a lot of great feedback on that. It's helping guide the direction of the organization. And some of those survey results were used as part of strategic planning and some of the decisions for these bylaw changes. So, again, thank you all for watching. If you've made it this far, go grab a drink because you probably need it. And let me know if you have any questions. You can give us a call down at the bottom, 505-843-8833, or support@swmls.com. Thanks. Have a great day.